It's been a couple months. I miss everyone. So I hope that everybody has gotten off to a good start with the new school year and everything settling back into routine. And what we're here to talk about tonight is actually something to get ready for the new year. And it's about this spirit of the time of year that we're in terms of looking inwardly and introspecting and figuring out how we want to make changes or improvements, or how can we resolve to be different and better this year, and particularly this time of year. So this idea started percolating in my head 2 years ago when we became dog owners for the first time. And neither my husband nor I has ever owned a dog. We haven't grown up with pets. We lots and lots of people. My husband's the oldest of 8. I'm the oldest of 7. So tons of humans, thank God, no pets. I think our parents were like fried. But we have a son who literally was obsessed with dogs and needed a dog very badly. So we decided to get a dog. So we were working with a trainer who was helping us, and we were trying to figure out, should we get a puppy or should we get an older dog? And we decided to go with a puppy, and we're working with our trainer. And I couldn't help myself. I said to the trainer, like, so is that thing true that you can't teach an old dog new tricks? And he's like, actually, that's a myth. You actually can teach an old dog new tricks. And then he volunteered himself to teach an old dog new tricks. I'm like, no, there is no old dog, actually. It's just theoretical. But I'm like, I'm an educator and I do a lot of personal growth stuff. And I'm just wondering, like, because people say, oh, it's too late for me. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And I'm like, is that a real thing? And he's like, no, it's really not. So I started thinking about, oh, please excuse me, I developed a cold over the course of today. But I started thinking about all the myths that people tell themselves about change that get in our way of being our best selves. And one of them is that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's a myth. You absolutely can. Sometimes the old dog doesn't want to be taught new tricks, but that's not really the point. And so I have come up with 5 different myths that people tell themselves about change, and why we need to discard those myths and instead explore and examine the truth so that we can tap into the energy and the power of this time of year and really make the kind of positive change that we want to make in order to become our best selves, and in order to go into our new year with renewed encouragement and resolve to continue to develop ourselves into the kinds of people that we want to be. So the first myth that I came up with is the idea that somehow people think that if they are going to, at some point in their life, make a departure or a change or do something differently from how they've always done it, that somehow there's something inauthentic about that, or they're sort of putting on a show. Like, if they don't really necessarily feel it on the inside, then they somehow feel like it's just not authentic and it's not real. And therefore, there's something either hypocritical about it or disingenuous about it. And I have found this to be a pretty commonly held myth, and I have found it to be something that really holds people back in terms of becoming their best selves. So the interesting thing is that actually, according to Jewish tradition and Jewish ideas, it's actually completely untrue. The idea that we hear from Judaism, rather, is that every person has inside of them, like we talked about on the trip, a beautiful, perfect soul. And that beautiful, perfect soul is their real self. And that over the course of our lives, stuff is going to come over that and happen and cover it over and obscure it and junk it up and clog it up and make it hard to access that beautiful, perfect core. But actually, when a person affects positive change, they're not pretending to be something they're not, but rather they are returning to their best, most beautiful selves, whom they really were all along. And that was really inside of themselves all along. And we see this in the Hebrew word for repentance. So repentance means that, we talk about it this time of year at Yom Kippur, that we're supposed to make amends for our mistakes. We're supposed to introspect. We're supposed to apologize. We're supposed to make a better plan for the future. We're supposed to develop new behaviors. And the Hebrew word for repentance is called teshuvah. Teshuvah comes from the Hebrew word shuv. And shuv means to return. It's a very interesting word because where are you returning to? You're not returning to anything. You're being different than you used to be. But what the Torah is teaching us with this word choice is that we are actually returning to who we really are. We're returning to our most authentic selves. We're returning to our most basic and true selves. And this actually bears itself out in Jewish law. There's a law that a person who is born Jewish or becomes Jewish, it's like a one-way door. You know, like when you rent a car and you drive out of the lot and they have those claws on the ground. You can only go one way and you can't back up or you're going to wreck the car. Those things are so scary. Like every time I'm going over one of those, I check 6 times to make sure I'm going in the right direction. Like arrow, 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 because I'm so scared of those horrible looking things. So too, being Jewish, it's a one-way door. You can get in, but you can't get out, because according to Jewish law, there is nothing a person can ever do, nothing a person can think, believe, say, behave, no matter how bad, that will invalidate them from being Jewish, that will get them kicked out of the club. No such thing. It simply doesn't exist. And it's interesting because there are some people that behave very badly that are members of the tribe, and we might not be proud of that, but it's just a fact of life that you cannot ever stop being Jewish. So there's a very interesting story that happened during World War II where there was this Polish Jew. His name was Oswald Rufisen. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but then again, I'm not from Poland, so please forgive me. He was born in 1922 in Poland, and he grew up in a Zionist home, and he used to attend youth groups, and they always encouraged Aliyah, and he always one day wanted to make it to the land of Israel. Now, what happened was that when the Germans invaded Poland in 1939, he obtained false documents and he got himself a job as a translator. And in that capacity, he had insider information about when the ghetto in Poland was going to be liquidated. And there was a very strong Jewish community in the town that he lived in. It was the town of Mir, Poland, which had a very big Jewish community. And particularly, it had the biggest rabbinical school in the area. Called the Yeshiva of Mir, which actually has now relocated to Israel and New York and is still one of the biggest rabbinical schools in the world. And because of his unique and crucial capacity as a translator, he had insider information. He was able to alert the Jewish community that the Germans were going to liquidate the ghetto, and he was able to save many lives. Unfortunately, his false papers were obtained and his identity was discovered, and he ended up escaping to a monastery where he lived the rest through till the end of the war. And in that monastery, Oswald converted to Christianity. And in particular, he became a Carmelite monk, and he started to develop plans to make Aliyah. And so he gets to Israel after the war, and he applies to Israel under the law of return to become a citizen. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, the law of return is a law that Israel has that any Jew is allowed to obtain automatic citizenship to the land of Israel. So he says, I'm Jewish, and therefore I should be allowed to become a citizen. Well, the Minister of the Interior rejected his application and said, you're not Jewish, you converted to Christianity. And it was sent up to the Supreme Court. So let me see what year it was. In 1959, he appealed to the Supreme Court, and he was standing there in his friar's long robe, big cross around his neck, and he started arguing in front of the Supreme Court 2 reasons why he felt he should be accepted under the law of return. The first one was that under the ideas of Zionism, a person's religion and a person's nationality were 2 separate things and did not have to be conflated. So he said, listen, it's true that I'm a non-Jew by religion, but I'm a Jew by nationality, and nobody can ever take that away from me, so therefore I should be allowed to become a citizen. The second reason he advanced was Jewish law. He said, according to Jewish law, there is a law that goes like this in Hebrew, Yisrael, af al pi shechata Yisrael hu. A Jew, no matter how he may sin, is still a Jew. And he said, therefore, according to the ideas of Zionism and according to Jewish law, I am a Jew, and you cannot reject my citizenship. Well, the Supreme Court did not like his arguments, and they rejected his claim. It happens to be that he stayed in the land of Israel and he eventually did become naturalized, and he ended up living the rest of his life as a Carmelite monk in Haifa. But if I would have been on that Supreme Court, I would have accepted his argument that he is Jewish, because there's nothing you can do to ever stop being Jewish, no matter what you believe or say or wear or teach or preach or do. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And there's nothing you can do that can take away that inherent inner core of who you really are. Where does this idea come from? The idea dates back thousands of years to when the Jewish people first came into the land of Israel. And they were under the leadership of Joshua, and they were coming into the land. And one of the first cities they encountered was the city of Jericho. And there was a famous war there, and they blew shofars, and they went around the wall, and the walls came tumbling down. It was very miraculous. And one of the instructions that the Jews were given at the time was that when you miraculously conquer the town of Jericho, don't take any of the spoils. Because that's not what this is about. This is not about acquiring stuff. This is about obtaining the land of Israel and living in there according to the promise that God gave you. This is not about becoming wealthy off of the other nations. So one Jew doesn't listen to the rules, right? There's always that one guy and starts taking the stuff. So a plague begins in the camps of the Jewish people, and people start getting sick and dying. And Joshua prays to God, and he says, God, what's going on? Why is this happening? And God answers him 2 Hebrew words, Yisrael chata, a Jew has sinned. And the commentaries observe 2 interesting things about this short conversation. Number 1, if you notice, God did not say any names. It was not necessary for the lesson. And it's something that we learn, that if we're in a situation where somebody is implicated, we should ask ourselves, if it's not necessary to name names, then we shouldn't name names. We should gossip and tattle as little as possible, and that God set that example. But the second lesson, which is what's relevant to our discussion, is that God said, a Jew has sinned. And the commentaries say on this, a Jew, no matter how he has sinned, remains a Jew. That God was making a declaration. A Jew, he sinned, but he's still a Jew. He's still my child. He's still my nation, and nothing can ever stop that. So what we have to remember is that there's nothing inauthentic or fake about coming closer to our truest, most pure, most beautiful Jewish selves. In fact, even if it might feel unfamiliar, or it might feel like we're trying on somebody else's identity, that it is the most authentic way that a person can be, because that's our soul. That's returning to who we really are, returning to our soul. Actually, the great singer and a songwriter, Shlomo Carlebach, whom you guys met Pamela Klayman on Shabbat, she talked about Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. He was one of her greatest mentors, and he wrote a song called Return. And I'll sing it to you just briefly, even though I have a cold and I'm a little stuffy, but bear with me. So he sings this song, and it goes like this. Let's see if I remember the words. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are, return to where you are, return to what you are, turn and return again. And the song goes over and over like this, and it's so haunting, and it's so beautiful, and it's so true. We're simply returning to who we are, returning to what we are, returning to where we are, and that's how we become our most authentic selves. So that's myth number 1, is that somehow there's something inauthentic or fake about making changes, and the answer is not true. The most authentic place you could possibly be is returning to your real self. So that's myth number 1. Myth number 2 is I am my mistakes. Now, we get very, very bogged down by our mistakes. And I find that very often we tend to identify ourselves by our mistakes. And if you think about, let's say you're going to bed at night and you're laying in bed, you're sort of reviewing your day. And it's so easy to beat ourselves up and to kick ourselves for our mistakes. We remember all of them. Why did I say that? Why did I do that? Why did I go there? I shouldn't have responded that way. I shouldn't have lost it. I wasted my time today. I should have worked out. I shouldn't have worked out. I shouldn't have eaten that. we're so good at criticizing ourselves and beating ourselves up. We have this like running loop in our heads that's so critical. If we would apply that criticism to somebody else, it would sound horrible and mean, but somehow we have no problem talking to ourselves in such a demeaning and critical way. In fact, Dove Soap has created these little videos to bring out the idea of positive identity and body image. And one of the things that they did was they took these two French actresses and they asked them for several days to keep a log of the negative things they think about their own bodies. Excuse me. So every time they would think something negative about their appearance, they would write it down. So you see them in this little video. I'll try to post it in our Facebook group if I find it. Your teeth are so small. When you smile, you look so silly. Or your legs are so short. You can't get away with wearing skirts. Other people with short legs can get away with it, but somehow it doesn't work for you. And on like this. And they wrote them down. They kept a log. And then they asked these two actresses to sit down in a French cafe and to read each other the lines that they had written. So they sit down and they start telling each other these things. So two women sitting across the table from each other in a crowded cafe, and one says to the other, "Your teeth are so small, it looks ridiculous when you smile." And the other one says back, "Your legs are so short, I don't know why you think you can get away with wearing a skirt." And they're going on and on like this. Thank you, Rena. They're going on and on like this. And the people sitting around them start to overhear bits and pieces of this conversation, and they're horrified. And they feel kind of intrusive, but they sort of can't help it, and they start coming over. And one of them says, "I'm so sorry, like, I don't mean to be rude and I don't mean to eavesdrop, but how do you talk to one another this way? I mean, you're hurting her feelings." And they start laughing and they reveal that it's a setup and it's sort of an experiment to prove a point. And the point is that we tell ourselves things in our heads that are so mean and so horrible, we would never say them to anyone else. But somehow we think it's okay to do that to ourselves. And we tell ourselves, I am my mistakes. I am defined by my mistakes. I am paralyzed by my mistakes. And these are terrible, terrible messages. So what's the truth? I mean, Judaism is into mistakes. We stand there on Yom Kippur and we say, I did this, I did that, I sinned, I sinned, I sinned. So what does Judaism tell us? Is that not true, that we are defined by our mistakes? But the answer is actually a little bit different. And part of the answer can be found in a book written by a woman named Carol Dweck, D-W-E-K. And the book is called Mindset. Some of you may be familiar. And the book describes two different kinds of mindsets. One is called a fixed mindset, and one is called a growth mindset. In a fixed mindset, we tell ourselves all of these bad messages. I'm not good at this. Your teeth are too small. You're just bad at math. You never remember people's names. Or even in the positive, but in the sense that we are identified by certain things that we are either good or bad at. So a fixed mindset for the positive might be like, I'm really good at baking. I'm really good at swimming. Or, my hair is really nice. A growth mindset, on the other hand, is that everything that I experience in my life is something that can impact upon me, and I am malleable. I can change and flux over the course of my life. If I'm not good at something, I'm not good at it right now. I'm not good at it yet. Maybe it's something I can learn. Maybe I can learn from my mistakes. And this is actually the Torah perspective. Because if you look at the Torah word for sin, it's chata. We mentioned it earlier when we said Yisrael, afal pisha chata, Yisrael who, a Jew, even though he sins, is still a Jew. Chata is the Hebrew word for sin. What is the meaning of that word? It's the exact same word that's used in archery when a person pulls back the bow and arrow, lets go, and the arrow misses its mark. The Hebrew word is exactly the same, chata. What do? You do it again, right? Think about children. Children do this so naturally. If you ever had a child I think I might have mentioned this on the trip. If you ever have a child, let's say I have a couple of daughters who like to take gymnastics, right? So they say, Mommy, Mommy, I'm going to show you a cartwheel. So they do the cartwheel and it doesn't come out very good, right? So what do they say? I'm going to do it again. And they do it again. Oh, no, that wasn't good. I'm going to do it again. And they keep doing it again and again. They always think that they're going to get it right in the future. They're so full of optimism. They're so full of hope. What do adults do? We try something and we're like, I'm just not good at that. No, it's not my thing. That's such a fixed mindset. It defines us by our mistakes. Children understand a growth mindset. We have to be taught not to become too adultish in this regard. Children understand it wasn't good yet, but I'm going to keep doing it again and doing it again. And adults are so hardened and we're so affected by the mistakes and the failures and discouragements that we forget that mistakes are simply a rung in our ladder of growth. And we have to say to ourselves, what did I learn from that mistake? What positive value can I gain from that mistake? I have a daughter who graduated with her bachelor's degree. She wants to be a psychologist. So she's taking a little break between her bachelor's and her graduate school. And she decided to get an internship as a research assistant in a lab because she's very interested in research. So she got herself an internship at Cleveland State University in the aging, cognition, and something or other as a research assistant in a lab, which sounds very impressive. But according to her, it's actually kind of boring. And I was so proud of her because we were sitting around at dinner the other night. And she said, this research assistant thing is such a valuable experience. I said, really, why? She goes, because it's really teaching me what I don't want to go into. I was like, that's such a growth mindset. That's awesome. I said, are you trying to say that it's kind of boring? She's like, well, it's a little more boring than I thought it would be. But this is really good information. And I was so proud of her for being able to see it that way. And I said, there will be things in your life that are boring, but maybe you're forming some connections or relationships that might help you in your career for the future. You're learning that sometimes we just don't know what something is like until we actually experience it, and we experience it, and then we learned. Instead of thinking of it as a mistake, as a failure, as a stupid choice, we look at it with a growth mindset. So the second myth is that we are not defined by our mistakes. We don't have to beat ourselves up for our mistakes. Instead, we can look at it with a growth mindset and say mistakes are a rung in the ladder of my growth. So the first myth was that we are somehow being fake or authentic by trying on new behaviors or habits. And the truth is we are merely returning to our truest self. The second myth is that we are defined by our mistakes. And the truth is that mistakes are a rung in our ladder of growth. What is the third myth? The third myth is that somehow we think that positive change is going to come from self-loathing. And that if, we're not going to be able, you see this a lot with, again, going back to body image, where when somebody is totally fed up or disgusted with how they look, that's when they're going to go on a diet. That's when we're going to start exercising and fixing their, food choices and stuff like that. But the truth is that our most positive and healthy growth does not begin at a place of self-loathing. Our most positive and healthy growth comes from a place of self-love. And we learn from the Torah that God loves us with an infinite, infinite love. And nobody knows our failures better than He. Nobody knows our weaknesses better. Nobody knows our mistakes better. And He still loves us. So perhaps we can also love ourselves. And the Torah teaches us about the character trait of humbleness. So the Torah says, who was the most humble person in the whole Torah? It was Moses. How do we know? Because it says in the Torah, and Moses was the most humble person on the face of the earth. Okay. Sounds like a pretty good testimony. But who wrote that? Who wrote the Torah? Well, according to the sources, God dictated it to Moses and he wrote it. So it looks something like this. God says to Moses, okay, Moses, are you ready to continue dictation of my Torah? God, I'm ready. Awesome. Here's what you should write. Write that you're the most humble person on the face of the earth. Now, what would a regular person say? I can't write that. That's a little self-congratulatory, don't you think? God, Moses, I said write it. Okay, fine, I'm writing it. But we don't see that. Moses didn't argue with God. He just wrote it. You know why? he knew it was true. He really was the most humble person on the face of the earth. There was nothing disingenuous about that. What was amazing about it was that it didn't make him conceited. Being humble is not about not recognizing your worth. It's about not becoming conceited and arrogant about your strengths and not letting your weaknesses break you. That's humbleness. Your strengths are a gift from God. Your weaknesses are also a gift from God. It shows you where your work is. It shows you where you need to stretch and grow, what you need to work out. That's beautiful. Neither of those things needs to take you into a bad mindset. Loving yourself exactly the way you are with no fake conceit and no depressing self-loathing, that is the most humble and beautiful and self-loving way to be. So we have to remember that the best way to change is to love ourselves, warts and all. I'm beautiful, I'm special, I'm lovable, I'm wonderful, and that's why I deserve better. Instead of, I'm disgusting, I'm horrible, I must change. The first is so authentically Jewish, and the second is noise. So that is the third myth, that somehow we have to hate ourselves in order to change, and actually we have to love ourselves in order to change. Let's talk about the fourth myth. The fourth myth is something that you may have told yourself or someone you love, and it goes like this. Too little, too late. If you've ever said something like that to someone, you know exactly what that sounds like and what it feels like. And it's very depressing because actually the Torah says the opposite. The Torah says it's never too little and it's never too late. So where do we come off saying this? Somebody's trying to make amends, somebody's trying to change or apologize or fix something, and we just say, well, it wasn't enough, or your timing was wrong, it wasn't soon enough, and I reject your overtures. So for a counterpoint to this idea, we have a beautiful story by somebody named Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was a rabbi who lived in Lithuania approximately 200 years ago. Very brilliant man. And he began this kind of revolution in Judaism called the Musar movement. Musar is a field of Jewish study that relates to perfecting our character traits and approaching spirituality by perfecting our character traits. Musar is actually something that I teach a lot of here in Cleveland. And so Rabbi Salanter is a role model of mine. And one of the things that he was known for was he would experience a run-of-the-mill everyday encounter, and he would really pull out like a spiritual lesson from it. So here's a story that I would like to relate for today. So the story goes that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was returning home one night, and he's traveling through his village, and he sees that a neighbor of his is still up. The light is on. There's a candle burning. And so he softly knocks on his door, and he says, "Hey, good evening. What are you doing? I see you're still up." And the neighbor was a shoemaker. He was sitting at the table, at his work table, fixing shoes at the light of the candle. And the shoemaker said to Rabbi Salanter this Hebrew phrase, which has since become well known. Kol zman shahaner dolek, as long as the candle is burning, efshar od letakein, I can still fix. And Rabbi Salanter took this sentence metaphorically, and he got so filled up with the greater significance of those words, that the story goes he started dancing through the streets, singing this song softly to himself over and over again. Kol zman shahaner dolek efshar od letakein, as long as the candle is burning, I can still fix. And the way he understood these words was the candle is a reference to the Jewish soul. And that as long as my soul is burning, as long as there is still life within me, I can still fix. Never too little. And it's never too late. There's always something that I can do to be better. You can teach an old dog new tricks. It doesn't matter how old I am. It doesn't matter how many mistakes I've made. I can always do better. And this is such a beautiful metaphor. It's such a beautiful phrase. And it's such a beautiful story that counteracts this sort of cynicism that society gives us, too little, too late. That's not how God looks at it. God says, whatever gestures or overtures you make to try to improve yourself and to try to make amends and apologize and be a better person, I take you. I love you. When we stand there before God on Yom Kippur, trust me, we should have been there a long time ago, and we should have, done a lot more. But God doesn't say to us too little, too late. He says, my children, I love you. I'm so happy that you're here. So shouldn't we try to behave more godly to other people and to accept others in our lives in this way as well? So the next time somebody behaves in a way and you feel like saying too little, too late, say to yourself, is that really a Jewish way to respond? Or maybe I could find forgiveness in my heart for this person, even though I don't feel that their gestures were good enough or soon enough. So that is our fourth myth, too little, too late. And the truth is that it's never too little and it's never too late. So let's review. The first myth is that change is inauthentic or fake. And the truth is that it is a return to our true selves. The second myth is that you are your mistakes. And the truth is your mistakes are a rung in the ladder of your growth. The third myth is that if you really hate yourself, you'll be motivated to change. And the truth is that our best and most lasting and beautiful change comes from loving ourselves so much. And the fourth myth is that it's too little, too late. And the truth is that it's never too little and it's never too late. Let's talk about our fifth myth. Our fifth myth is that you can't change the past. Now, I will concede that it is true that you cannot go back in time and redo something, and you cannot undo something. You can't unsee things, and you can't unsay things, and you can't unhear things. That is all true. But here's what you can do. You can change the meaning of the past. How so? Imagine that you have a Martian who, lands on planet Earth, and your Martian comes to a construction site. So at the construction site, there are two things. Thing number one, there's a huge sign at the construction site, and it shows an artist rendition of the new building, and it's beautiful, and it's got the landscaping and the marble and the trees and the driveway and the garden, and it's gorgeous. The second thing you see is the actual construction site. What's on the construction site? So it's still pretty early on in the project. They've already demoed the existing building, and all that you see are piles of dirt and a huge hole in the ground. Okay. So your Martian is standing at this site and looking at this and basically finding it completely impossible to reconcile these two visions. And you come along and your Martian says to you, hey, Earthling. And you're like, yeah. Because apparently you answer to that. And he says, Earthling, what's going on here? This sign is a lie. This sign says there's a big, gorgeous building on this site. And the truth is that there's a pile of dirt and a big, huge hole. So what do you say to your Martian? Well, it's not built yet. This is the building that is going to be built over this site. And they had to dig this big hole in order to make space for the foundation that would then make it possible to have a building. And then you really blow your Martian's mind because you say, just to make things a little more interesting, a couple of days ago, there was a huge building right on this property and they knocked it all down. They destroyed it. And the Martian says, what are you talking about? They destroyed it? How could they do that? They destroyed it now. It's worse than it used to be. It's not like it started out as an empty field and they didn't build something yet. They had an existing structure and they ruined it. And now they have nothing, a pile of dirt. This is a downgrade, man. But we know the truth. What's the answer? Is that you have to tear down in order to dig deep, in order to rebuild. And the question really is that when we have destruction in our past, or demolition, or pain, we can't change that something was demolished. But what we can change is, what are we going to do with this construction site? This is and I get to choose what I build on top of it. I can use this demolition to dig deep and build something even more beautiful than used to be here. Or I can sit around and cry about the demolition and be left with an empty lot. It is up to me, and the power is in my hands. How do I define that? How do I fix that? How do I change that? It's really up to me to build something more beautiful in its wake. And I really am able to do that because I am the one who gets to decide how I am going to play the cards of my life. Because life is God handing out a deck of cards to all of us. And you sit there and you look at your cards. And it's true that there are some things in our lives that we don't get to control, that there are demolition sites and there's destruction and there's natural disasters. We're thinking of all of you Floridians out there. Really, God willing, you should all be safe and be okay. There's all kinds of scary things that happen in the world. That's the cards that you're dealt. Now you get to decide, what am I going to build on it? How am I going to play this hand of cards? Am I going to sit around and say, oy vey, oy vey? Or am I going to play this hand of cards like nobody has ever played cards in their lives? And I will be left with something more beautiful. Because we all know, if you want to think about relationships, a relationship in where there's been a rift or a fight, and it's so uncomfortable and it's so unpleasant and it's so horrible. And then somehow or another, the two members are able to really talk and to cry and to connect and to make up and to apologize and to get more connected. And what happens is they get a greater understanding of themselves. They get a greater understanding of each other. And their relationship now has the potential to be even more beautiful than it used to be and even more close than it used to be. And if you would not have had that demolition, if you would not have had that digging, that destruction, that hole, you never would have had the space to build something beautiful on top of it. The space wouldn't have existed. So now you're left with something more beautiful. You have just changed the meaning of the past. And that's incredible. That's so powerful. That's so beautiful. We have so much power in our lives. Sometimes you see people who have the most amazing marriages, the most amazing relationships. And sometimes this is because they've had serious tests and serious difficulties in their lives. There's a guy who runs a marriage website. It's called marriagemax.com. His name is Mort Fertel. He's a Jewish guy who lives in Baltimore. And he has all this amazing relationship advice. He's a total guru. People come to him from all over to get advice from him. And he writes in his stuff that the reason he started all of this and the reason he learned all of this is because he and his wife lost, I don't remember if it was a baby or twins or something really, really tragic and sad. And their marriage was in so much trouble. And he had to force himself to learn so many new things that their marriage became so much closer and so much more beautiful because of it. If they wouldn't have had that destruction, he never would have had that beauty. So he writes in one of his emails here, just going to read to you a little bit. The people I know who have the best marriages are people who went through hell in their relationships. They got over their past because they used it as a catalyst to improve their situation. In other words, the painful event inspired them to change themselves and their marriage. If you make the right moves, you will come to view certain events as birth pains that led to a new and improved marriage. And that's how you get over the past. So people want to get over the past before they commit themselves. They're like, well, I can't forgive that person for doing that. Well, the question is, you can use that as an opportunity to come closer. So that is the final myth that people contend with, is that they think they cannot change the past, but they are wrong. You can change the past. It depends on what you build on top of it. It depends on how you define it. It depends on how you choose to think about it. It depends on how you play that hand of cards. You can use it to break you, or you can use it to build something more beautiful than you could ever have imagined. So to quickly review our 5 myths, and then if you guys have any questions or thoughts, you can chat me up on the chat box. The 5 truths. I won't revisit the 5 myths, but let's review the 5 truths that we have come up with. Number 1, your mistakes are a rung in the ladder of your growth. Number 2 is, nope, sorry, that was number 2. Number 1 is that when you change, you are becoming your most authentic self. Number 2, your mistakes are a rung in the ladder of your growth. Number 3, wait, let me check what's number 3. Your best change comes from self-love. Number 4, it's never too little and it's never too late. And number 5, is you can change the meaning of the past and build something more beautiful on top of it. So I want to thank all you guys for participating today. And I want to bless you and wish you a Shana Tova Umituka, a happy, sweet, beautiful, beautiful year. And I hope that some of the ideas that we discussed tonight are able to be motivating and to help you resolve to become a truer version of your most beautiful, most authentic self. And I miss you guys and I love you guys. And Lashana Hababi Rishalayim next year in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for participating. If you guys have any questions or thoughts, please let me know. Thank you, Rena. Thank you, Marla. I miss you too. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Leora. Oh, what are those cool emojis? Now I have to check it out. Oh, is that an apple and honey? I don't know what that is, but it's pretty cool. All right, guys. Lila Tove, good night. It was great to be with all of you. Oh, thank you, Tara. I love to hear that. That's awesome. Tara, tell your city leader that I wrote a curriculum for doing a prayer series from my book. So if she wants it, she should get in touch with me and I'll send it over. Oh, Alyssa, great. Perfect. I forgot that. Good night, Rena. Thank you. I hope I do feel better. Alyssa's on it. You're awesome, Alyssa. Thank you, Tara. Thank you. I do hope I feel better. Amen. I hope it's one of those 24-hour things that goes away super fast. All right. I'm signing off, you guys. Good night. Mwah.